Welcome to episode 50 of Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation talks at Georgia Tech. I hope you've learned a fraction of what I've learned through the diverse topics of this series. My name is Ellen Dunham-Jones, a professor in the School of Architecture, where I direct the Master of Science in Urban Design. Before I discuss today's talk, I want to call your attention to two upcoming Redesigning Cities events on February 25th and March 10th. On February 25th, Georgia Tech is pleased to bring Sarah Zodi, a landscape architect and professor at Harvard, who will be giving this year's Douglas C. Allen Lecture in the School of Architecture lecture series. She is an award-winning designer and a scholar who has related Frederick Law Olmsted's abolitionist work in the South to the later design work of the firm. Sarah will present selections of her own work, and then I will join her on stage and lead her in a conversation. Then on March 10th, we will be sharing stories about the role of Atlanta's Sweet Auburn neighborhood in the civil rights movement. Cultural developer Gene Kansas and architect illustrator Clay Kinningham will present the extraordinary way their new book, Civil Sites, tells these stories through the building's occupants and activities. Bill Stanley will share some of his own stories about Sweet Auburn in the follow-up conversation. Now, today, we're discussing health and economic benefits of walkability with the researcher who coined the term walkability, Dr. Larry Frank, a former professor here at Georgia Tech and one of the most cited social science scholars in the world. He will share his research findings with us before having a conversation with Yilun Zha, a PhD candidate here. I'm privileged to have learned from both of them for many years, and especially about how to produce quantifiable data to inform the design of cities and human thriving. Yilun Zha embodies exactly that integration. An award-winning urban designer and voted best teaching assistant in the college here at Georgia Tech, he never met a data set too big or too hairy for him to love. His dissertation used novel techniques to examine the multifaceted ways in which diverse foodscapes, cities, and human experiences interconnect and impact public health. As a researcher, he has contributed to various federal and locally funded projects investigating health equity and hopes to continue such work after he graduates in May. Hint, hint. Anyone out there? Dr. Lawrence Frank, or Larry as I'm accustomed to calling him, has been bridging design and data in innovative and creative ways for more than 3 decades. In the 1990s, he coined the term walkability and founded a company, Urban Design for Health, to help decision makers. While teaching at Georgia Tech, then the University of British Columbia, and now the University of California at San Diego, he has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles and 2 books quantifying the connections between built environment, active transportation, and health. Larry, please come to the podium and share your work with us.
Thank you, Ellen. It's an honor to be and a pleasure to be here. It's been quite a while since I've been at Georgia Tech, and I just walked around campus with Yilun, and it's amazing the changes that have happened here. The place looks absolutely beautiful. What a beautiful day it is. So I'm going to talk about my research and background, but I just want to say thank you for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. So the beginning of actually, it's been about 31 years since I became a professor here at Georgia Tech. And when I started here, there was a whole lot going on in Atlanta. And Jeff Rader's here, who I've known since that time. Atlanta was scrambling when I started my job dealing with the Clean Air Act. We had really strong federal oversight taking place here, and a lot was happening in Atlanta at the time. Atlanta was incapable of even remotely coming close to conforming with the requirements of this very strong, potentially threatening, economically threatening policy. So I show up with an area of research that kind of fit really well. I was very fortunate and really impressed. And I'm taking a moment to mention this, that I've concluded I've worked in 3 different regions as a researcher and professor: Atlanta, Vancouver, and now San Diego. And they are all so different. But what Atlanta had that was so clear when I got here was what I guess I'm calling institutional infrastructure. The agencies and people were working together really well. And it made it very easy to engage outside the university. I was very welcome to do that. And it led to an incredibly interesting research project. And I'm very thankful for that. I also want to mention that Billy Bachman, Dr. Billy Bachman, is right here, and I'm who I still work with to this very day. Billy was doing his PhD at there, had already done his PhD at the time. So it's good to see familiar faces. So why do we need to integrate health and transportation? There's many reasons. We need to do it to help achieve our public health goals, to achieve transportation goals, and to share resources and guidance for both transportation and health professionals. But more broadly, it's become very clear, and I'm going back in time a little bit in this talk, unlike what I usually present, more recent stuff, just to give you a little bit of the history, is that the Clean Air Act actually was the single biggest health-based mandate in the history of the planet, truly. Is basically, if you ask transportation planners culturally, do they think they're really dealing with health? They actually don't really see that as much as they're dealing with a requirement that is a health-based, but it's a health-based mandate based on air quality standards. But what wasn't involved in the Clean Air Act was this whole behavioral piece, how we get around, and what kind of came out of the research that we ended up all doing together in a project called Smart Track that was massive and many years long and almost became a little bit of an ecosystem, was that how we spend our time as we move around, whether we're being active and walking or biking, at least some, or sedentary, that sedentary time in cars really has an adverse health effect, that no matter what the air pollution result is, you can have clean vehicles, you're still sedentary. And that sedentary time is what equals partly chronic disease. And so that became something you kind of difficult to wiggle out of as an elected official through technology. It's a sticky problem, a good one to have if you're a planner trying to create walkable cities. So over the last 5 years, we've actually had some good news. And I'll kind of try to keep some positive light on things intentionally. We've seen in the pandemic a willingness in communities to take space from roads back for people. We've seen it all over the country, all over the world. There's a lot of innovation going on and a rethinking. Do we really need to have that much space for moving cars with no space for moving people? So that's been a real positive part of coming out of the pandemic. So I just want to point out this positive, and I walk around and see some of that here, which is very inspirational. But, so here we are in 2020. What led to a lot of this work was, and this is 2020, the news is way worse, and it was pretty bad in 2000 when we were actually dealing with the obesity epidemic. So we have an air quality mandate. I think of this research program as the Clean Air Act meets the obesity epidemic, truly. And it's kind of what it is. And so look at the percentages. They're so extreme. So much of the country, more than 40% of the population, have unhealthy body weight to the extent that they're prone to developing a lot of different types of chronic disease. That's really worrisome. So we're in and there's a huge economic impact from that. Obviously, not just the cost of illness, but healthy people are productive. They have higher workforce participation rates. There's a huge business case to be made. So I've really been focused a lot on the economics of the health impacts and not just the direct healthcare cost savings. I'm going to show you numbers in the tens of billions of dollars saved. Los Angeles, one case. Been working on this topic for a long time, have a lot of case studies to share. This is just a little bit of humor. One of my students, his name was Brian Leary, helped me make this slide long ago. He worked on Atlantic Station. And I was thinking, I heard this statistic when I got here. I think it was someone named Joel Stone was working at Atlanta Regional Commission. And he told me, the statistic that, that average person here drives 43 miles, then drove 43 miles a day. And there's 3.5 million people in the region. And I just looked out the window and I thought, how far is the sun? The sun is 93 million miles away. That in one day, we drive further than the distance to the sun in one region. That's not just Atlanta. It's just an example. So when my students say, and we talk, I get a lot of pushback when we start talking about alternatives to driving. Everybody thinks it's crazy. I said, well, this is what's really crazy. And I always say, well, that drawing is not to scale. So the synergies and really the magic and the fun stuff is in the fact that unfortunately we had separated our sciences, our disciplines so effectively in our culture that when transportation started to realize that there is a impact on health and environment all can work together, that there's resources and ways to synergize what we do. So that's kind of what the story is a bit about. So this is what I kind of like to say is my research program in one slide, but it really kind of describes, and we published this about 7 years ago. On the left are the things that we impact through our decisions as transportation and urban planners, making cities and building communities, transportation infrastructure, what kind of mode and what gets built, where and what we build, land use, obvious. Decisions we make about walkability are a lot land use, mixed use, density, these are land use decisions. But there's a pedestrian environment that's unto itself that has to be taken into account, most often neglected historically in our work, and perhaps where most of the future benefits going to come from. Very inexpensive investments in pedestrian environment features bode very well in having a lot of economic benefit and payback. They're not expensive. They're missing in lower income communities where chronic disease is concentrated, and they can have an enormous return on investment. And then green space. So those through travel and activity patterns affect our behaviors and exposures through time. Our behaviors are obviously diet, physical activity, that's energy in, and energy out, that's energy balance or imbalance, which is what we have often. Social interactions are a very key core part of this. And then there's exposure. So while we're promoting people to be active and bike and walk, what are they breathing? That's really important. And the public know that. The general public understand that the concentration of air pollutants is really highly correlated with walkability. We published a paper based in Vancouver on this relationship, and it's obvious. So the results of the research I'll present today are actually attenuated. They're actually kind of watered down because while we're getting a health benefit in the more walkable places, as I'll show you, from chronic disease reduction, it's still being impacted adversely by air pollution exposure. We have to figure out how to solve and make places walkable without concentrating air pollution, and there are solutions. Air pollution, traffic safety, crime, injury risk, or so forth really have adverse impacts. And then there's our biology. We respond through our weight, stress, and inflammation, which actually through time and space interact with each other to affect physical and mental health outcomes. And all of that has cost. Our cost benefit models and tools that are used in transportation completely or mostly externalize or ignore most of the health impacts that happen that actually, in terms of scale and dollars, are even greater over a period of time than the transportation infrastructure itself on the table. So what's being externalized is not a triviality, it's massive, and that's a big issue. So that's a bit of a start. So on the macro side, transportation, accessibility, regional is important. These are built environment elements and scale. And then complete communities is really the land use. Most of the research has been on the left. But on the right, the micro scale is where we've been focused a lot more lately, and I'll talk more about that. So this is an old graphic I developed here long ago, but it really was sort of useful. And just there's two key things about walkability that we care about. Proximity, how far it is to get to different destinations, the heterogeneity or the mix, complete communities. And then there's also the connectivity, the directness. And directness can be in place for vehicles if it's a connected road network, but the pedestrian environment has to be there. So those are all the things we try to measure. This was from Atlanta long ago, the study, but I mention this because politically, this was a very hard study to get funded, to have happen. But it happened for a lot of reasons, because of all the sectors' involvement and because of the Clean Air Act. But it also, this stated preference survey was the most difficult piece to retain. It was on the chopping block repeatedly, and it wasn't just because of the amount of money. It proved, and it was known to likely do this, is that we were able to show an incredible unmet demand for more walkable environments. So the market has been there all along, or not all along from way back, but it's by the 1995, we started to see increase in value in real estate in town properties, places that were more walkable, than the rate of increase in areas further out that were more car dependent. We started to observe it. And it wasn't just Atlanta. Congress for New Urbanism, many examples. I think Volk and Zimmerman, they had a lot of studies showing these relationships. So we really worked hard to quantify that. And that really helped us when we rolled out the findings from the study, because it wasn't like we were saying, you need to do this and people don't want it. It was just give the people what they want. So early innovations happen, and there is a paper Ellen shared. This study, one of the studies that came out of Smart Track, we published maybe 25 papers or more. But the one that got the most attention was the one on driving and obesity, time in cars. Very clearly why public just resonated with the public. And to do that study, that paper, it's been revisited. The journal approached me a year ago, American Journal of Preventive Medicine, say, hey, we'd like to revisit your study because it's been so highly cited, and it really kind of tracked the way the science evolved afterwards. And so we did that. So that was an attachment that you got. And in there's a lot of explanation. But basically, what was innovative was, to begin with, most of all, was the multi-sectoral, interdisciplinary partnership that was brought together, that we all worked together on this study. So there were end users involved at the beginning, and they stayed with it. And actually, there was one individual who was very important from the Georgia DOT. His name was George Boulinow. And he stuck with the project out of even personal commitment. He was amazing. And actually, but the whole study group stayed together. We built, and Billy built it, a regionally consistent land use transportation information system. The GIS Center here at Georgia Tech, it was the first one ever done, 13 counties. It's 1998 or somewhere around then. A lot of places didn't even have GIS data. We had to scan and digitize the places, and we built it, and it was consistent, and it worked. And it really advanced the thinking, that we need that parcel level detailed information to really understand where's it mixed and where's it not, what's out there, what's really accurate. Travel survey, we intentionally recruited. The Atlanta Regional Commission worked with us as a partner, and we recruited, oversampled people in walkable environments. Their last survey before this study had very few people in walkable places. Well, when you do a random digit dial survey in a region with very few walkable places, you're not going to get a lot of walkers. So that when their data showed very little slope or relationship, the most walkable and the least walkable performed very similarly because they weren't any different. So we oversampled walkability. And lower income people, we worked with Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership. We actually got these people that are hard to get in the study, and we got people in walkable places, a lot of them. Our phone rang during dinner, and I was in the survey. So literally, it happened. We integrated health. This was an incredibly difficult. We were told, no way are we going to integrate health data into our data collection, into our travel survey. It won't happen. And the Centers for Disease Control, being a partner in the study, said, yes, it will. And it actually did happen, and it wasn't that hard. Even just getting height and weight in a travel survey, we were told, can't do it. Cultural difference, perceived as difficult to get. You know what's more difficult to get than height and weight? Income. And travel surveys rely on income as one of the primary predictors. So we did it. Documented extensive unmet demand. I already said this, for more walkable places. And also we documented significant health and related economic benefits of the Livable Centers Initiative. That was the key to get the funding from the federal government for the study. And ARC worked with us on that, and it was a big benefit. So we were able to show that these aspiration-based plans that communities were doing on their own performed really well. And that was kind of the key innovations. So this is the old model. But basically a red arrow up means more likely to be obese and a blue arrow down. And what we learned, as you get older, you gain weight. Okay, got that. Education and income, inverse, get more educated, likely to weigh less, earn more money, weigh less. Independent, more we walk, less, got it. Time in cars, new, up. That was the big finding. Mixed use, less. And then if someone compared to a white male was a black male or female, they were more likely to be obese, but the white women were way less likely to be obese compared to white men. And we learned that the white women underreported their weight. I couldn't believe it. So then I was told that the white men overreported their height. And I said that would never happen. I couldn't imagine such a thing, especially someone at my height. So that became fun. And then this happened. It was published all over the place in the Washington Post. So I asked when they revisited the study, I said, can we please have this? They go, we can't get that because they won't say. And so they absolutely, Washington Post was more than happy to share this picture. It was the public's reaction. So we learned about kids and we learned about elderly. We learned about difference between men and women across gender. We had so much data. We had 17,000 people, so we could divide the data. The general population, when you keep the data all together, you can misspecify and think that findings that may be true for men may also be true for women or vice versa. So we learned, for example, walkability predicts body weight for men, not for women. For women, we learned it was where they shopped for food, actually, in the expected direction. So that was, but here's youth. So 5 to 8, 9 to 11, 12 to 15, and 16 to 20-year-olds as you go from left to right. And you can see the sample size right there, pretty good sample size for each group of kids. So as kids are getting different age groups moving through the different years, you see what matters for the youngest, 5 to 8, is at least having a place to recreate. Makes sense for that age group. When they get to be 9 to 11, they're walking to school. And then we see density. So that's masking or picking up distance to school, just so you know that. 12 to 15-year-olds are, out and about, teenagers, they want to do everything, and they're still in the neighborhood a lot. So everything about the built environment is extremely predictive of their active travel likelihood in walking. And then when they hit 16, the relationship starts to disintegrate. And you can see some things still matter, but it's sort of an interesting little arc of growing up. This is just a picture, an example of the residential preference survey. It was the most kind of humanistic or, real part of the thing to think about is imagine places. You can't really do a meaningful study on this topic without understanding what people are thinking when you ask them what's a walkable environment. What is it to them? So preferences are really important. So you see, if I were to move, I'd like to find a neighborhood. So we did 7 of these forced trade-offs. And this data still exists, and I have to say it still has life in it. It's an old data set, but it's got a lot. So we've analyzed and published some papers, but there's plenty left in here. So this is one we just show, for example, lot size and drive time. So, forced trade-off. Again, roughly speaking, a third of the people who live in neighborhoods that are really far away, big lots, from the most important places where they work and other destinations, they'd trade off part of their lot to, so we had a lot of those findings. This is separating the effect of preference and choice. So row 1 are people that want but do not live in a walkable neighborhood, and you see how much they drove, 36 miles. People that want and live in a walkable neighborhood, the high, row 2, they drive. So there you're combining the effect of their underlying preference and the environmental effect of where they live. And you're seeing they drove the least. Low, row 3, they don't want and don't live in a walkable neighborhood. They drive the most. And then the 4th row is that they are in a walkable neighborhood and they want to get out. And they drive a little bit less because they're in a walkable neighborhood. So that's sort of the thing. And what that point is that both our attitudinal predisposition, preference, who we are, will shape our behavior. If you live next door to your sibling and they like to walk more, your sibling's going to walk more. If you both move to a more walkable neighborhood, you're both going to walk more, but your sibling will still walk more. So, so I think I kind of summarized more time in cars, more obesity, more walking less, physical activity, lots of findings, unmet demand. I think I kind of got this covered. So, so that's kind of what we learned from that. So now moving forward, since then, we started to improve. GIS as a science evolved. It was evolving. This was all very new. So we had to learn from this. We started to develop better measures and ways to quantify what people can get to where they live. So that's what this is about. And it's sort of different buffering techniques to get accurate measurement. So this is our version of the transect. I use this a lot, and I'm going to scaffold a lot of research. Now, this is the research staircase I'm going to go through. This is cross-sectional data, meaning associations can be derived, but not causation. And I'm going to compare people across who live in different levels of walkability from the least to the most walkable. So here's obesity. So we did a study in Vancouver called Where Matters. We've done a lot of studies like this. Those in the most walkable environments are 42% less likely to be obese than those in the least, most car dependent. Heart disease, 14% reduction, but only in the highest levels of walkability. Diabetes. So this is kind of interesting because you really don't even need to be in the most walkable environment to get health benefits. It's important from a policy perspective. A lot of people in our preference data show us, and we know in general that many people don't want to be in the very most urban setting. What's, kind of the middle three, somewhat walkable or moderately matters. So this is very important. So diabetes shows up as significantly less. This is a large sample. We had I think this was 30,000 people in Vancouver in very small areas, highly concentrated, really good data set. Sense of community. So opposite situation, as walkability goes up, a sense of community has the potential to increase. I will tell you that it's not always the case in the data that we see this. It's a complicated thing to measure, and there's a lot of reasons why sense of community in the most walkable places may not actually be that high. But in this study, lo and behold, the measurement came through showing the way the question was probably asked in a way, knowing your neighbors, maybe not knowing them well. I think that's called bridging, not bonding social capital, if I'm not correct. So you have a little bit of connection, you familiarity, but you may not know them very well. So on the natural environment side, I think it's important to take a moment because environments are not just built. Of course, there's variation in natural environment. And I think E.O. Wilson obviously was a key UGA, I think University of Georgia. Huge program in ecology and UGA. So anyways, we did a study in Sacramento that looked at tree canopy. There's been other studies since. So this is 2016, we published this. Very good evidence, and there's a very clear understanding. E.O. Wilson put it, we have a natural affinity and need for contact with nature, but shade and trees obviously have a protective effect, and there's a lot of very good research done here on this topic in reducing extreme heat exposure. That's a major area of research that we know right now is key. So we did this study probably before that, but basically I'm going to just jump ahead. This was called Green Prescription. It's been a fairly well-cited study. And our bottom line result is a 10% increase in tree canopy is associated with an 18% reduction in obesity. But trees do not make you thin. As much as the Sacramento Tree Foundation that funded us to do the study would love to say that, it's the physical activity that could occur because there's more shade and a better environment. But what's also going on here is wealth. And I think in all these studies, we have to be a little bit critical and understand that a researcher will say, well, I controlled for income. That doesn't wipe out the income effect. That wipes out some of the variation in income, but we don't capture all the variation in income in our little ordinal measure of 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 and more. I think income varies a lot more than that. And also wealth. People cannot even be earning much money, but have a lot. So there's a whole difficult aspect to that we have to be a little careful about. But anyways, there's pedestrian design features that are present and correlated with where the trees are. So there's other factors. So I don't mean to water down the study to nothing, but I would say that I think it's not just the trees, it's the whole environment in which goes with a walkable neighborhood. On to causation. So in about 2014 or 2012, the city of Vancouver came to me and said, we're going to start building greenways. We want to build a lot of them. And we're going to start with Comox downtown. Would you like to do a study on Comox? We'll fund you. I said, nah, I wouldn't want to do a thing like that. So anyways, they funded this study. It was pretty cool. We did it for very little money, to be quite honest. The city helped us with recruitment. It was an amazing opportunity. And so the red line is, anybody been to Vancouver, downtown Vancouver? It's pretty walkable to begin with. It's what it's known for. So they took this street and said, we're going to reappropriate the road space from cars to bike and ped. We've got parallel roads that can handle the traffic. So I said, okay, so we recruited 524 people. Half of them roughly were within 300 meters, 3 blocks of the corridor, and a little bit, and the rest were further away. Those are our controls. They didn't get the greenway, closer. This is what it looked like before. Pretty walkable. Same place later in the year, and this is what it looked like after, but there's bike lanes, and only if you live there can you drive that block. So we've published 3 papers since then. Our findings have been almost textbook. My student, Victor No, went after, we have a travel survey that they did. So he went after GHG emissions, showed 21% reduction in carbon after, I think it's even probably more. Those closer to the greenway were twice as likely to get recommended physical activity, and those that were, again, close to the greenway were 3 times as likely to report by cycling. So cycling went way up, physical activity, all the expected direction. We're now looking at sense of community and many other things we might do with this data. So I will take a moment and say that while health is a very important human health, there's also planetary health. The ecosystem that we live in needs to be able to support us so we can be healthy. That's called climate change and reducing carbon, greenhouse gas emissions. And that is also kind of the other side of the same coin, perhaps. So I just want to mention that there's 2 things that we can do to reduce carbon through technology, cleaner fuels, cleaner vehicles. We haven't really pushed that as far as we could. And then there's demand. We need to change behavior. This is a predicted map of Seattle showing how much GHG emissions people generate based on the walkability of the environment where they live. This is Vancouver again. This is their household travel survey, 30,000 people. And you can see the distribution across the walkability. That's the same walkability 5 quintile continuum here. And you can see the GHG emissions declined nearly 3-fold from 17 to 6 kilograms per person per day from the least to the most walkable areas. So you just see a very significant reduction. As expected, it would be very surprising to not see that. Of course, we understand distances are greater, automobile use is greater, and I just thought I'd show this. And then here's mode share. And this is a region that has a pretty high, in the most walkable places, 40, cars are only, less than half of all trips are by car. So that's amazing. So they're doing okay in that sense. But even in Vancouver, which is so walkable, has so much walkability, it has a lot of sprawl too. So a lot of variation. So that's a good laboratory for testing this kind of stuff. And you can just see those findings. So this is basically in Seattle, we found that if technology were to really, major progress was made, that by 2050, people would be able to drive 1/3 as much as they do today. Would only be able to drive 1/3 as much if they were to comply with the targeted reductions that were in the Kyoto Protocol that we were at that time taking more seriously. So that's just to give you an example. Anyways, that's kind of just a summary. So on to the money, on to the cost. So I can wrap up and we'll have a discussion. But so in 2008, American Public Health Association approached me and my team and said, hey, we would like to get to the economics of this. There's a lot of evidence that's health related. What does it cost? What are the hidden health costs of transportation? So we did this study. It's the framework for it. Very simple. There are two ways to monetize health impacts. One is mortality, more statistical value of statistical life, or cost of illness morbidity. We started off being directed by our client at the time. We went down the mortality pathway. I've not done that again. Since then, I've been working on the morbidity side. I think cost of illness is the way to go at this, but I think you could do both. You can apply a statistical value of life lost through mortality and still add that on. But cost of illness is the way we typically do it. And how do you do cost of illness? Well, there's the attributable cost, the directs of healthcare expenditures. And then there's the indirects. The indirects matter. They're really big. So you can just run a model and say, an average, what's the incident rate reduction? Like diabetes is going to go down 9% or that incident rate, and you multiply out the number of cases that would occur based on age and gender, and you get your number. It's a linear extrapolation of the same relationship. So it's not going to be any different in proportion to the reduction in cost, to the illness variation levels, but you're missing the absenteeism, the reduced productivity in the workforce, the disability, reduced productivity for those with more disease, more work missed, more disability, increased mortality as well. And also, when we build pedestrian and transit and bike infrastructure, it's more labor intensive than roadway. So that puts money in people's pockets, and there's more expenditure and more economic benefit on the investment side. So there's a lot to it. So what are the aspects of land value capture? The High Line in New York's the best example. That definitely had a land value impact around it. Capital construction, jobs, maintenance, equipment, tourism, huge necessity for tourist environments, have to do this. But we've been looking at healthcare and less absenteeism the most. So I'm going to build off our studies in Los Angeles. So this is a lot of the work that we do now is to take this research, and through a software tool called the National Public Health Assessment Model, we apply this evidence and data to alternative scenarios. It's scenario planning, decisions about regional growth, what to do within a transit station area, how it gets built, and comparatively to different options from typically more car dependent to more walkable. So this is Los Angeles's long-range transportation plan. This was, going back probably to about 2014-ish, maybe 2015. And we had predicted, this is their trend, where they're heading. They had an adopted plan, Measure M, $170 billion was put on the table. The voters were ready to pay for a solution. It's that bad that it hit that. And then you can see sort of the numbers, physical activity, active transportation is all going up as expected when you spend a lot of money on it. Driving is going down, and then the health, chronic diseases are going down. And you may look at those numbers and go, that's pretty disappointing. Those are very small percentages. Why bother? In a region of 20 million people, a 1% reduction in type 2 diabetes, I believe, is 200,000 cases. That's a lot, and that turns into a lot of money. So if you have a high degree of confidence, even in a low percentage over a small amount of a very large quantity is actually a lot. So anyways, and then Glendale I have on the right, because what you're looking at is the surface of an entire very complex region. And as a region changes over time, some people get older and they might even get poorer. And that actually sends chronic disease up. So not everywhere is going to experience benefits. Even if you invest, it's distributed. So Glendale is an example of one region that was getting more transit and more investment. So you can see the variation is there. But this is sort of the punchline, which is what we're publishing now, working on finally 10 years later. Los Angeles sort of, this is for every dollar spent on active transportation, they set aside $12.9 billion, and the roadway lobbies came at that money like vultures. They did. And we got hired. We were hired. They put out an RFP and said, we need someone who can monetize this and show the economic benefits of active transportation, because roadway lobby saying, we're gonna help you. We bring goods to market. We're the reason that we exist as an economy. That's a traditional thought. They didn't even probably think that they thought the sidewalks and the bikeways would have an economic. They didn't think that had an economic benefit. They thought it was a nice thing to do. So we ran the REMI model. I hired AECOM as my subcontractor. The REMI model is the software tool that's used traditionally in a lot of our MPOs around the country to monetize. This is when a study is done showing there's a lot of congestion on Interstate, 75 or 85, and the road, here's the cost that it's costing us every year or whatever, over a period of time. And the cost of widening the highway is so much less that we can't afford not to widen the road. And we've been through that. So this is taking that same model that monetizes delay and lack of productivity and turns it on its side. So what we found was $6 roughly per dollar spent on active transportation returns. $6 return for every dollar spent. Construction, $2, and you see the rest. So that's kind of the beginning of thinking about the direct and the indirect. It's an example, but it's a case study that will prove true elsewhere. It's all very evidenced. And, that's just sort of a little bit to think about. Finally, what is this software tool? So the National Public Health Assessment Model that we apply at Urban Design for Health was funded by US EPA. We started with a project in San Diego, state of California, and then went national. And here's a little bit. It's also been supported by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation with the data collection that we had to do. We build, I don't know if you've heard of the Smart Location Database. So Urban Design for Health builds that for the US EPA. That's a national block group level data set. Billy's very responsible for doing that. Done a lot of that work. So anyways, we're definitely, here's the regions that NFAM has been applied in. I think there's 15. I don't know I have all of them. We actually applied it in Yuma recently. So lots of different applications. And here's how the software tool works. We start with our geospatial inputs, a lot of data, a lot of layers, just some examples, demographics, built environment measures, and then we predict through the modeling. These are regression models. Like I just showed you diabetes, and I showed you heart disease, and I showed you obesity and physical activity. Each model has its own coefficients. It's a pile of regression models that we just populate the coefficients with variables using the national data set. The national data set can be used, the tool can be used anywhere in the country. Baseline numbers are immediately pretty much available because we can predict current condition. We have all the demographics matter a lot, environmental features matter, and collectively they're used to predict chronic disease. So we use data from the American Community Survey, and we use built environment data from various other sources there, you see, and then the outcome data. So where do we get the health outcome data to do this with? Because we need a large sample. We use the California Health Interview Survey. We can get that at the block group level, and every year there's about 50,000 participants. It's an amazing data resource. So we spatially join that and we model these relationships. But we also look at travel behavior, household physical activity. We use the National Household Travel Survey. So we need both. And here's the way the data is, all the different layers. Just an example. I'm going quickly because I know I probably don't have so much time left. Yep, lots of different layers, all spatially joined. Here's an example of Chicago. I think we were doing a project in Chicago at one point. So this is estimated annual health costs from type 2 diabetes, from all these different chronic cardiometabolic outcomes collectively. And it just shows a mapped block group level prediction of that at baseline. So you can take that and say, well, what if we were to increase density or change mixed use or change that one of the variables? How much difference do you get? So it's all there and usable anywhere. We've been working on a web app, kind of make it more applicable in other places, easier for people to use. Can revisit that later. So here's an example. This is published, journal article we got out in Journal of Transport Policy. The first tool that we built in San Diego, we applied it in a neighborhood that's getting a train station, and the San Diego trolley got it, actually, in Chula Vista. It's down near the Mexican border, as you see on the left. Um, and this is their, this is their planning area. And they had a plan for what they were going to do in that station. And we just modeled it. They're going to grow 3,000 people will move in. They'll make it more walkable. And I'm just making it super simple, but this is what we found. Significant increase in physical in minutes of walking, 15% reduction in high blood pressure, and about a 10% reduction in type 2 diabetes. Those are very good results. And we, kind of have found similar results elsewhere. So that's like a station area. This is a regional look. This is recent. Sacramento Council of Governments hired us recently to help them with their long-range transportation plan. They're, working in a region similar to Atlanta in some ways, where there's a lot of concern about how the region grows. Always a big debate about, to go more walkable, concentrated versus Atlanta Regional Commission's debate all the time. Every 6 years or so, every 5 years, it comes back up, or always happening at some level. So this is, look at those four. So this matters. This is how the region is established. So we did an exercise, this was fairly recent, where we looked at distributing 190,000 people, I think. So it was decided to make the study acceptable or more kind of, contained, not take up too much airspace, that we would just look at where the future people to come to the region would go. And I think it was around close to a couple 100,000 people, somewhere there. And they have three pathways: sprawl on the left, somewhere in the middle, balanced, and somewhere on the right, more infill. Okay, pretty simple. And here's what we found. So this was a learning experience for us, which is how to communicate this. There's only two things going on the slide. One is the prevalence rate, the red line, and the other is where the growth goes in those four types of places. I learned that this was understandable. It's easy to not be understandable. So anyways, this is loading the growth. This is the sprawl alternative. This is the most outward growth. We're seeing, what the prevalence rates are going up from 4.2 to 7.5, and more growth going into the developing communities. Okay, so now I'm going to go forward. This is the middle alternative, and we get about a 6% reduction in cases of coronary heart disease. Little more growth is going to the left. Okay, the blue bars. Now the right alternative. Most of the growth is going to the left in the most walkable places. And you get an 11.4% reduction. So that's the kind of level of information that could be used as they're having a debate in their plan. And maybe, and what we were kind of told was, it didn't push the region to go from all the way on the left all the way to the right, but it got them on the right-hand side. It got them on the left-hand side of the center one. It pulled them enough, and that's a win. Las Vegas is interested in a bus rapid transit system and wanted to justify or learn what the health benefits were going to be from it. This is more information than I can present right now, but if you're interested, we have many case studies. So towards wrapping up, what we're doing now. We really don't have much information on the pedestrian environment yet in a lot of our models. And that those features are more modifiable. They're less subject to public resistance. They're cheaper, and they could really have a big impact. So that's a big part of what we're thinking about and working on a lot. We actually want to take our NFAM model and make something we call PEDFAM, Pedestrian Public Health Assessment Model. We think that's a really important thing to do. Trying to capture these features. We're doing it using AI, automated digital imagery, reading of digital images with artificial intelligence to detect the presence and absence of these features. We've already kind of gone through an exercise. More than that, we've done a lot of work for years on it. We're ready to roll in that direction for sure. Finally, tracking places through time. This is San Diego. Changes in walkability, changes in density, each individual measure, but we have data to do that. And until we start to really track through time how places are changing in relation to how health characteristics and wellness and cost are changing, we won't have the data we really need to advise decision-making effectively. This is how we're going to get the causal data, but it also gives a way to steer funding. Performance-based funding based on achieving targeted benefits or targeted impacts of different measures. So that's longitudinal tracking of walkability is kind of where I think a lot of this is going. So I think that really is about it, and look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Yilun. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Frank, for your great presentation. There are just so many studies there, and I think it's not just the level of scientific rigor, but also kind of the practicality aspect of the study that really drive kind of actionable insight. I think they're really formidable. So thank you for that. So I'm going to start my question on I don't think it's necessarily your first project, but certainly the first high profile project that you did as a young scholar here at Georgia Tech, Smart Track. So Smart Track, for our audience, stands for Strategies for Metropolitan Atlanta's Regional Transportation and Equality. And certainly one of the things that make this possible is because Atlanta is really at the brink of failing the conformity with the Clean Air Act. One thing, so you mentioned that makes the Smart Track thing happen is what is called institutional infrastructure. Really, federal agencies, state DOT, we don't have local DOT right now, but MPOs, ARC, government, public research, they all work together to do the same thing. So I wonder, how did you, as a young scholar at that time, find the crack in a kind of, it's huge, but it's still conventional transportation grant to add a health and behavior benefit, aspect to it, which is not, commonly seen at the time, even for now.
Thank you for your question and for your comments. I had a lot of help. Jeff's here today, but it was unbelievable. I think getting Smart Track to happen was because of things that had nothing to do with me. The not the health part. There was going to be a study. It was essential this was mitigation written into the Atlanta Regional Commission's charter. In order to get your funding back or control of your money, you need to evaluate how you're growing. It was so out of control. So that would have happened, but there would not have been the health piece. The health piece was good timing. I was going to do it. I wanted to do that, and I had a way to make it happen. But there was no mandate or incentive, and there was a huge resistance to it. Everybody fought against it, and I just saw it as something that needed to happen, and the CDC is here. It just seemed like if it was ever going to happen, it was going to happen here right then. And in fact, the amount of funding that Smart Track had came from the transportation sector, and mostly by far. The CDC was included. Mm-hmm. They gave some money, but they didn't have much resources. Money got pushed towards it by me to get it in, because that was the innovation. And actually, I felt that given the political discourse, without the ability to bring health in and show people that this was good for their health, that the results would be dismissed. I just felt like it was a way and that's why the residential preference piece was so important, that we needed to show this is what people want and it makes them healthier. And I felt we needed both, because it was so counterculture to do here. It was, so that, and there was an ability to do it. So thanks for your question.
Yeah. So I think really the bulk of the presentation that you shared is really centered around the quantification of walkability and just monetizing and showing the impact of walkability, both on health and economy of a walkable neighborhood. I wonder, I think the term walkability kind of evolved from your PhD dissertation research in the 80s and 90s in the University of Washington, and you popularized it, which lead later into many, product like WalkScore, like EPA Smart Location. And everybody's talking about walkability, but we don't necessarily, so when we talk about like a neighborhood is walkable, we don't necessarily refer to the same quality or same characteristics, especially when we consider like regional differences, like the socioeconomic differences. So I wonder, how does the term walkability mean to you, and how did the meaning evolve once you do more research, once you collect more evidence? Does that change, or what's new? What's the new ingredient that you put into the definition, or how we think a neighborhood is walkable?
It's a great question. First of all, a lot of people contributed towards the term and developing the concept of walkability. I'm one guy, but I did it early. It just happened. My dissertation was on mixed use and dense. It was on measuring the travel behavior, how the environment in Seattle, these measures and the physical environment, and we had to call it. But we knew density mattered, and we knew you had to have a mixture of places, and then we knew connectivity had to happen. And then, so anyways, it evolved, and it was very early. And so, yeah, I probably was the first, but there are a lot of people who were right there. So anyways, yeah, our definition of walkability is lacking if we don't include the pedestrian environment. Mm-hmm. So basic. I actually now think that the pedestrian environment included in walkability, it's now going to be called real walkability. Because it really is. Because that's what a person thinks who's not a researcher when they walk out their door is that, can I walk? It's the basic, do I want to walk? If I could, is it really nice? Is it pleasant? Those are the features that we're talking about. The finish, we can think of it as the frosting on the walkability cake, mm-hmm. but it's more than frosting. Mm-hmm. It's really part of the cake. So I would say getting the full complement, and maybe even if we just have crossings, sidewalks, seating, trees, the 6 to 8 basic elements will be doing a lot better service to the public. Mm-hmm. And so adding those features is key.
One thing I do notice from your conceptual diagram, the theoretical framework of how built environment affect health, is that you actually separate walkability from pedestrian environment. So I wonder, have you tried, for example, testing the relative importance of the two? So you have, meso to macro scale walkability measures, but you also have this, micro scale, for example, presence of benches, street lights, trees. How does that work together? Do they interact, especially I think for vulnerable population, for example, the elderly people that you mentioned in the presentation?
Thank you for that question. It's perfectly timed. My PhD student at University of British Columbia, Benet Adekari's dissertation was on that topic. Over the last 20 years, we've been collecting data on pedestrian environment features with a series of NIH grants, working with many colleagues, different universities around the country. And we've quantified for different age groups. And this is for seniors. We used the elderly NIH cohort, and we showed, Benet found an interaction, meaning synergistic, that where it's already, walkable in other ways, you put it's intuitive. You get a major return because there's a latent demand. People are there. They're like, I would want to walk. I can't, mm-hmm. And also found very good results for women. So that's one of the things that we've noticed throughout the years. And even a recent study came out, Abby King, a colleague of mine at Stanford, published, showing, again, different results for men versus women. They use cell phone. It came out in Nature. I don't know if anybody saw a major study about 3 months ago, maybe 6. Our study shows with the pedestrian design features, that makes the difference across gender, mm-hmm. for aging population.
Yeah. Well, for pedestrian features, I think it can be even something even smaller, not just benches. So I see a qualitative assessment of the walkability environment in the downtown LA, and it's focused on the seniors. So the things that I complain most about is the cracks on sidewalks. It's not even benches or trees. It's just the cracks that make them exposed as the risk of fall. So I think bringing in that kind of micro scale and some super micro scale features into the equation, I think is very very crucial. And related to that, so today we're joined by not only students but also designers, leaders in the civic and government. So I wonder. So the project that you just showed mostly are quite major. So even the one that in Vancouver, you said is a modest project, it still costs the city government for like $1 million Canadian to complete that. I think that's still a quite substantial, I think, financial commitment for smaller and especially suburban rural municipalities. So since you mentioned the importance of pedestrian features, I'm wondering do you have a message for municipalities that want they have a have the motivation to do this, but might not can only allocate a moderate resources to just start with to raise awareness, but also making visible impact? What are the small changes, like maybe just adding some benches or pave the sidewalks, color the sidewalks? What are some the tactical
Tactical urbanism.
one day change you would recommend?
There's a really good book, Tactical Urbanism.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'd send them. The goal will be, of course, to know what's giving you the best. I mean, at that point, we're not talking about super expensive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be more maybe where to prioritize where it goes and to win the battle over getting those features into the communities that are the most underserved, where chronic disease is the most concentrated. Maybe start with that. That's a big lift in our culture right now. It always has been, but I think we need to kind of be real about it. That's where you're going to get the return.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also where the funding for those features will be the most difficult to find. Didn't mean to give you a difficult answer to a difficult question.
That's fair. So in one of the picture, when you introduced the Vancouver project, you showed a counterflow lane. That's part of the greenway retrofit. Yeah. So counterflow lane means when you have previous like 3-lane one-way street and you reallocate one driving lanes, then to put a opposite direction of the bike lanes. So how does that work? So what's the difference between just putting a same direction bike lane? Why do you put a counterflow lane?
I did not design the greenway retrofit. I only measured its effect on health.
So in your...
I got a phone number for you, and I'll tell you he'll give you a great answer. He knew it.
Well, in your...
Vancouver has incredible talent in its transportation engineering department. They went through and they went block by block. That greenway was like 5 blocks, and each block is very different based on the land use around it and the circulation. So they managed to make it acceptable for the people right on the road there to be able to live their life and still continue functioning. But so that was a decision that had to be made. So
okay, yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, if they're doing it, I trust them. They have good brains.
But there's always lots of options of the way it could have been designed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. Okay, so I want to talk about some new things going on. So I think the way we work from the campus here, we run into like 3 Waymos. They're constantly like flashing, spinning, cameras capturing.
Today.
Yeah, taking photos. So we now have a lot of new tools, new technologies like AI, like computer vision, sensors everywhere to kind of help us quantify those micro level walkability. And that's very different from, I think, the first wave of walkability advocacy that we see from Jane Jacobs. So she was doing observational, very qualitative assessment. She walks on the street herself, and she uses activist journalism to support her idea. So I was always a little skeptical of those new tech, not in the scientific rigor, but in the fact that can we get a stronger message from those tools? So I also want to pick your brain on, so how do you think that AI is really helping us to get walkable neighborhood, not just helping us measure walkability?
I don't know that AI is what's going to do it. It's the tools. We don't need to lose our old tools that work for us when we have new ones become available. The journalistic techniques that Jane used are still very important and need to be continued to be used. We still need the qualitative assessment. We still need that. We still need the meaning. Now we can measure more clearly and more accurately. That helps and makes the ability to document what she couldn't do at that time or didn't do was to relate to prove impact. Now we have causal evidence. So that means that we can merge together the great work that she did with the new work that has, the quantification, and we have a much more powerful collective impact. I think we still need qualitative assessment and tools just the way we've always done them.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And also about the future. So you've been at the frontier of the battle between time spent in the car and walking and biking. Trying to use built environment to kind of encourage people to spend less time in cars so they can have more physical activities. Again, we have now cars driving on their own. Waymo, we have electric fleets, we have drugs like semaglutide, GLP-1 that help us lose weight without much of the need to exert activities. How do you think those things will disrupt the equation that you set up earlier between time spent in a car and walking and biking and their health outcomes? Are they helping or not?
That's a complicated question. I'll try to answer. So I've been interested, and we've started working with pharmaceutical companies a bit, and we got quite a ways into it. There is an interaction likely. We can hypothesize that when people are on metformin and they're living in sprawl, they probably didn't get as good of a result as they did if they're living in Buckhead or let's say Virginia Islands. There's a missing piece in our clinical drug trials, a big one, and maybe there's sort of a way to kind of rethink that, but. I think actually the diabetes prevention program was a 30-year clinical trial. It's been underway for that long. And in about 2002, after about 6 years, they recruited 3,000 people at baseline, some that got metformin, the drug, 1,000, one-third. One-third got lifestyle and activity intervention, and one-third were controls. 6 years later, the study came out, and maybe you've heard of it, twice as likely to not develop. This was a pre-diabetic elevated A1 blood sugar group at baseline. And this is it's an amazing study that it was the lifestyle intervention had much lower likelihood of developing, I think almost half as likely as you were if you were on metformin. So that shows that study in '02, we knew that lifestyle behavior really matters, but drugs matter too. So maybe there's ways that these things start to work together.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's another form of kind of induced demand. So when you adjust to one side of the the balance, the other side will follow. It's not just that you lower this and you get immediate feedback on the outcome. I can go on for forever, but to be fair to our audience and people joining online, I think I'll let Ellen to jump in to share some questions from the audience.
So the active transportation effect of how do we really get active transportation like we see on the Beltline and the greenways? Okay. We just need more greenways or what?
So is your question, is it a fiscal or what are the fiscal and regulatory ways to implement or get it to happen big time?
Well, in other words, what use can we put these public rights of way often that are way overscaled for cars and to convert them or to modify them so that they start acting more like the Beltline?
Great. It seems like you're pointing out that there's an opportunity. There's a lot of space for this to happen, and we're not making it happen as well as we could. I will just take the financial pathway, which is I think we have to figure out how to monetize the economic benefits into bonds. We need and if we can bond a stationary because of predicted land value capture, we ought to be able to figure, and that the premise is that it's a known thing that's going to happen. The lift value capture will occur. There's enough confidence that that's done routinely. Tax increment financing is a well-adopted, established policy in real estate finance. So why can't we develop a bonding mechanism on the health benefits? I think it's a money thing. I think it's solvable and it can be done. And it needs to be done. And once it is done, then we'll be able to move ahead.
Another question, Larry. Talk a little bit about how different types of transit support walkability. Commuter rail, buses, our MARTA station system here in Atlanta. Is any kind of transit always great for walkability, or are there subtle differences? Talk about transit and walkability.
Thank you. I'm glad someone asked about transit. It obviously needs to be you can't make a place walkable without transit. It's impossible. Everybody can't have 2 tons of metal to get a loaf of bread and you're going to have a walkable place. Doesn't happen. So, and that actually in San Diego, So I will say this, the San Diego and Atlanta have a lot of similarities. San Diego is not as walkable as a lot of people might, or, people go there and they're like, they go to the beach and they're like, wow, this is great, and there's like all these bike paths, not in the city, not where we live and work. There's transit, there's rail, there's stations that have opened along the Blue Line trolley from downtown up to UCSD that have almost no development happening yet, very limited, very slow, hard to believe the air rates. So anyways, I just say that, there is a good example where the bones have been laid, the transit system's there, and the magnet of the transit station isn't yet being fully actualized on. I think Atlanta actually maybe moves better, quicker than San Diego so far in some locations. So transit, there's a lot of good research that shows very clear relationships. We measured it. I had a PhD student took on the transit. That was his dissertation. I think we used a lot of Smart Track data and Seattle data too, and showed transit use and meeting physical activity. I was going to show a few slides of that, but people who use transit are obviously far more likely to meet the physical activity guidelines because they're walkers. It's so basic and so obvious. But
explain it. It's because to use transit,
you have to walk
there to get there, to get out, all of that.
So that's always been a known thing. But you asked about different transit. Obviously, is a broad category. There's so many different, like the Las Vegas project. Las Vegas isn't ready for a rail system, but they're thinking bus right, exclusive right of way. We've got congestion. It's a big city, but we'd like BRT. There's so bringing that health benefit of BRT investment, but that's really that's what we measured in that study, was showing more people walking who are using transit. We made the assumption that the land use would change though, because our metrics often that predict physical activity are these walkability measures. We don't have as many metrics, and we're building them now on bikeways and greenways. But we really, so the transit, the travel time, transit accessibility, travel time to destinations on transit is definitely a predictor of physical activity and walking.
You've kind of maybe already answered the next question, which is just talk a little bit about how the health impacts of walkability compare to bikeability.
So that's what we're working on right now. We're learning about. We have a project that is to help an entity make decisions about how to further build greenways and bikeways, mostly bikeways. So that's really kind of prescient right now. So bikeability is a linear construct. It's a corridor, kind of a buffer. And so if you want to look at, remember, food environments, for example, for people who bike, it's going to be, and actually should be for anybody who live and work there. These are linear corridors between, live and work, as I said. But the metrics for bikeability take into account topography, and bikeability is a function of right of way and access and safety, much more so. Well, I don't know about more so, but in a different way. And also, there's a huge differentiation with putting cycling facilities on road with some
with a sign, share the road.
Yeah, or even worse, share. Yeah, right. But that's even worse. Or having a space dedicated or off, finding corridors. And maybe that goes back to the question that you asked, Jeff, which is there is right of way along many roads that can be, but separated right of way is essential. And that's a level of service and a safety issue.
Oh. I remember reading, and I thought it was a study you were involved in, but that it actually surprised me. So I'm a cyclist, but it said that actually the passenger in a car or driver of a car is actually often breathing more of the exhaust than someone on a bicycle. Do you know it? Have you followed? Did you read that too, or you didn't write that? Okay.
No, but that's a really important question, which is, the health effect, the collective health effect of that experience.
Yeah. I want to believe that, but so with ongoing changes to the regulation of greenhouse gases, How do you expect changes to developments such as walkability? I mean, do you think, I mean, I guess another way I'm now rephrasing the question, but if you proved the market demand for people wanting walkability, but there also were regulations to help support that. Now, if the regulations are less there, what do you think's going to happen? Is the market demand enough to drive it?
In some places, yes, but I think we'll lose part of the market in some places as well. Except if if it depends on the money. If the regulation affects the funding for how lending is done, then all bets are off.
How have your estimates on health costs been received by elected officials and by developers?
I was on the TOD Council of the Urban Land Institute for about a decade, and I actually found that there was expressed great interest in the topic with very little uptake out of lack of necessity. This is the most progressive people in the real estate industry on this group. And there was, that's a great idea. They just didn't really need to deal with it. They were making so much money doing what just, it was it just, we, it there's no, so the developer side, I would say the developers who are committed and want to build, this is what they do. They'll continue to do it, and anything we can do to use this information to help them, the better. And finding financial mechanisms where we could bond the health benefit will just send this through the roof, because there is that latent demand for it. It'll help them make money doing well. Good. But the rest of the industry, I think, is not going to come along unless they have to. But you asked about not just developers. There was
public elected officials.
So a lot of uptake, huge. So, but you have to find the change agents, the ones that are really they're already at the table. They already know they want to do this. I haven't experienced as much like where people just turn around on it. They're usually kind of already there. So I haven't found the flip that this message turns them around.
Well, episode 48 of Redesigning Cities featured the mayor of Oklahoma City, who put his entire city on a diet and then a road diet. And it's great. It was awesome. Great story. Little plug. So in your article, looking back at the recent article in Preventive Health, you noted, and as you showed in the slides, that lower income areas and that Black males and Black females just didn't seem to be getting the same benefits from those same kind of walkable features. Anonymous asks, would you expect similar increased health benefits and decreased emissions if the new greenway in Vancouver had been built in a lower income area?
No, I don't think the results would have been as strong. Mm-hmm. Lifestyle constraints, lack of free time, those two things alone, but diet as well. We found in the original study that Black people in the study were twice as likely to walk and twice as likely to be obese. And I remember going to when the reporters started asking, we got so much press, and I kept pointing to this other finding, and it didn't really make it into the press. But I always thought that was such a, obviously it has to be on the diet side, it has to be on lifestyle constraint. It's a whole bunch of other factors that we, so in order for the findings to be I don't think the effect would have been as much.
Yeah. So I also personally am really interested in the mental health aspects, and you brought up some of that. And I know that way back when in the book Urban Sprawl and Public Health that you co-authored, that there was discussion about road rage and like just how cars make ordinary people suddenly hate all the rest of humanity in an almost inexplicable way. On the other hand, we have great thinkers like Aristotle and Einstein, who very much associated the act of taking a walk with epiphanies and insight. And we know that, that it's those routine activity. If you're physically active in a routine activity, you're getting more oxygen and your brain is able to it doesn't have to focus on walking. It can actually start sparking. The loneliness epidemic, how can walking really help with talk more about just what you see in terms of walking and mental health? The loneliness epidemic to me is really huge.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely. It's a crisis in our country and getting worse. So, well, aside even just from walking, obviously a more compact environment creates more opportunity, and mixed generation creates more opportunities for people to meet other people. And if it's walkable, they can get out and do stuff. And if there's a public realm, got to have a place to go, that's not just a store. Doesn't need to be big, but there's a meeting place where people have some seats. It's so basic. What we always did for thousands of years, that stuff, village kind of small area is so important. So one of the things, and I had one student study this, was to measure that housing mix occur, so that people can stay in the same community throughout their life. So when they get older, they don't need to leave the neighborhood. That aging in place. That place doesn't mean your house. Place means your community. So obviously we talk about. So that's one, but that's a big mental health piece right there. So there's the isolation and some ways to deal with it. But the depression is very clinically tied to physical activity. We know that physical activity releases, brain chemicals, I forget which, serotonin, I think it is, that helps you reduce. So that is very clearly important, been measured. And in fact, when you monetize the health benefits using cost of illness of walkability, global burden of disease is the data set that we use to get from physical activity. So a dose of physical activity gives you all these different disease reductions. And one of them is depression, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. And the depression one is the one that turns into the most money because so many people suffer from depression. The numbers are huge, and the dollar is not that low. It's actually expensive. So there's an enormous, but it's just that there's a very strong connection between physical activity and I didn't present that today, but that's very interesting and where I'm kind of wanting to do a lot more work.
I mean, I'd love to see but when I moved here before the Beltline was this idea, but nothing had happened yet. Everyone said, oh no, it'll never happen. Nobody in Atlanta will walk. And now, I mean, it is obviously proven, yes, even in Hotlanta, we will walk a lot. Are depression rates down? I'd love to know stuff like that. All right, I am going to ask my closing question, even though I know Yilun has more questions, but Georgia Tech is a top research university full of students who have to do research papers on, of some kind. Can you please identify research questions or projects that you would especially like to see the next generation tackle?
Wow. I think this change in walkability, tracking now, making it dynamic. I think that does so many things. It shows where we've been, how we're changing, how we're growing. It puts making walkability part of health surveillance. Surveillance, that term is important. We measure other things. If we know it affects health, we should be quantifying that. We just finished through this funding we had from Novo Nordisk, which was the pharmaceutical company we work with. an exhaustive review of the evidence to date on weight trajectory, causal evidence showing body weight related to built environment. And I wrapped it around zoning. The entire thing. I thought, what am I going to do with this one more lit review? Yes, it's causal. Yes, it's state of evidence. So we worked really hard. My co-author Jacob Carson and I at UCSD. I said we need to do something different. So I think getting to the regulatory framework, zoning was enabled 100 years ago, Euclid versus Ambler Realty, based on health, safety, and welfare to separate, and we've been using it. I think this data shows that all this evidence showing that, and then Billy measured, we found that roughly 84% of Americans live in car-dependent places. We've done a really good job of accommodating people in car-dependent environments that were regulated through zoning. So the adverse health effect of the way zoning's been used. So I think I'm interested in those implementing things. I think this figuring out what that bonding funding mechanism is, how to take this and put it into money. I think that's a dissertation or 10. And then aging, really important. Also Alzheimer's, physical activity as a predictor of chronic disease for not just physical, but many mental health outcomes, even dementia. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done on that. And I'm sure there's much more. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there is more we could discuss, but I'm afraid that is all the time we have. So I really want to thank Larry, Frank, you have done an awesome job. Yilun Zha, I'm sorry I have cut you off in your questions. All of our attendees, you have been listening to episode 50 of Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation Talks at Georgia Tech. A video and podcast of this event will be posted to the Redesigning Cities website. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube and Podomatic channels or whatever podcast platform you prefer. And with that, I would like to welcome our in-person audience we have a buffet and some wine and beer, and let's talk some more. Thank you.